It's a tremendous zechus and privilege to be able to present these words of Torah with colleagues, friends, and other members of the RCA. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I wanted to share two different uses of the hif'il in Parshas Tavo in this week's Parsha that, in my opinion, offer very instructive and timely lessons hinted at right from within the text, but expanded in the words of various commentators. So the first, Vayareu osanu hamitzrim ve'anunu ve'nu alinu avodat kasha, usually translated as Vayareu, the Egyptians did Ra, they did evil to us. In the old JPS, the Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. Ve'anunu ve'nu alinu avodat kasha, they imposed heavy labor upon us. But of course, Vayareu is a hif'il verb, it's causative. So in an overly literal translation, it's not they did evil to us, but they caused us to be evil. It's an odd use. And the Haggadah has a sort of take, a commentary on this. I heard this from Rav Aaron Kahn, Shlita, in The Name of the Rav, the following idea, that when the Haggadah offers its interpretation, which I'll just repeat so people have it, right? So it quotes Kimasha Ne'emar, Hava nischak malo pen yirbeh, v'haya ki sikrena milchama v'nosaf gam hu asuni v'nilcham banu v'yala min ha'aretz, right from the very, very beginning of Shemos. So it quotes Paro saying, hey, we're going to nischak malo pen yirbeh, right? We're going to get wise with them lest they multiply, and if they multiply, they might become a threat. They might use their power, join with an enemy, and become an internal third column, a group of traitors, a danger to the empire growing within. And so in the interpretation quoted by Rav Aaron Kahn in The Name of the Rav, it's that this is a perush on the hif'il, on the causative nature of the verb vayareu. They made us evil. They assailed our character. They assumed that we would think evil thoughts. They made us into evil people. We were just living in Egypt. In fact, Yosef had saved the entire kingdom, but still they made us evil in their minds. They assumed the worst motivations and assumed that we were their enemies. But the Haggadah is offering a further interpretation, really, because in the end, you could say, hey, look, isn't that almost precisely what happened? It's just that there was no foreign invasion, but in fact, they became the enemy and just destroyed the empire the way it shakes out. So you could say, well, wasn't this thought of Paro, this paranoid thought, didn't history bear it out? But instead, I believe that the Torah, the Haggadah, is hinting at a sort of timeless lesson, which is that when we assail people's character, assume the worst motivations, and make them evil, that backfires. It becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. Our assignment of those negative character traits, in the case of the Egyptians, led to happens afterwards. Once we made them evil, it provided the license for us to engage in a campaign of violent slavery. That's what happened. Egypt was able to engage in its campaign of abuse and enslavement of our ancestors, specifically because of the bad character they had assigned to us, which raises a very uncomfortable question for all of us, really, which is that, and I'm myself included, when we think about people who we tend to view as opposed to things we stand for, threatening, what kind of motivations do we assign to their character? Do we assign the worst possible motivations and assume that they oppose us? And then what actions follow naturally from the thoughts, and even righteously from the thoughts, once they're evil or the enemy? All kinds of things that might otherwise be wrong now can be reframed very easily as just. And so the Haggadah is pointing that out, that the vayareu, the hif'il, is what causes the va'anunu va'nu aleinu avodat kasha. And in putting it in this, the declaration of the bikurim, the first fruit, and in having sort of someone now living in Eretz Israel offering their produce, the first in the season, and proclaim this, it's really to reinforce a very particular idea, which is a sort of humility and an understanding that the Egyptians were reliant on our labor. Whose labor are we reliant on? And so it raises a whole series of questions and implications. It's a very powerful commentary by the Haggadah. There's another use of the Hithil in this week's Parsha, which is equally interesting, at least the way the Ramban uses it. So I wanted to draw attention to that as a kind of concluding thought. The very conclusion of the curses at Har Gerizim and Har Eval. And it says, cursed is he who does not uphold the terms of this Torah, this teaching, to observe them, to do them, and everyone will say, Amen. What is this lo yakim, to establish? It's lehakim, to make a stand, to establish. It's also a hifil, a causative. So what does it mean? The Ramban has a stunning interpretation, really, in its shul practicality. And I think it has important implications for kind of post-COVID shul reality. The Ramban says as follows. This is talking about Ala Chazan she'inu mekim sefer Torah la tzibor la'arot pnei ksivaso lakol k'moshe mefurish b'mesachas Sofrim. The Ramban says, who is the one that is cursed here who doesn't establish this Torah, our Torah? It's the person that that messes up Hagba. So a very interesting thing. Someone that doesn't show the face of the Torah's writing, lakol, to everyone. And then he quotes from Masechas Sofrim, right? That you have to, when you do Hagba, you have to turn and show to everyone, to the right and to the left, in front and in back. Because it is a mitzvah for the men and the women to see the face of the writing and to bow before it, to prostrate and to say, this is the Torah that Moshe placed in front of us, etc. That whole thing. So what's the Ramban getting at? That is talking about the person that doesn't take Hagba seriously enough and doesn't show it. But the Ramban is saying something much more, that establishing the Torah is really about empowerment, lehakim, right? He's leaning into the notion of, again, this hifil, this causative verb. It's not making the Torah stand, but it's making other people cause the Torah to stand. And so it's engaging the entire community as actively as possible in the ritual, which is why there's an emphasis here on what the people do in response to the Hagba. It's not just a passive act of viewing the script, but in this statement by the Ramban, people are even bowing in front of the Torah, which is not the minhag, and certainly in my shul or other shuls, although people do use their finger to point in other words, but there's an engagement of the community with the ritual, which is otherwise more limited. Which is an important point, and it's interesting to kind of link it to this notion of the curses. But it's particularly important, I think, because if your shul is anything like my shul, in your community, after COVID, ritual participation has been restricted after years of trends of democratization and trying to get more people involved and finding ways to allow more people to be involved in different contexts and different communities. We've cut back on kibudim and aliyot and who's participating in different ways. We've sort of loosened it again and now reconsidering. But what we lose when we have a more centralized kind of religious service, and the importance of mekim et divrei haTorah hazot, of making sure that the Torah isn't just something that's strong amongst leadership, but that we're causing other people to establish their Torah. And that the way we do that, according to the Ramban, or one way we do that is not just Hagba as a particular example, but his broad kind of klal, I think, which is fair to extract from this, which is that ritual engagement and involvement of people is an important way to make the Torah, and literally the actual Torah in this version of it, real in their lives.